She is a prominent champion of the sustainability agenda. She's a driving force for people, planet, and prosperity. Earlier, I spoke to Her Excellency, Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. We asked her whether the world would meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Please watch.
Thank you so much for joining us, Madam Deputy Secretary General. So great to see you.
Well, fantastic to see you and a pleasure to be with you.
Let me start by asking you about the recent economic downturns, the supply chain crisis, the rising cost of living, greater inequality around the world. It really has put the SDGs into some jeopardy and, in fact, putting them even further out of reach because of what is happening globally today. What are your thoughts?
Well, one's thoughts of great concern. The SDGs still remain a framing that is as relevant as when we gavelled it in 2015 today. But we've been hit by multiple crises, from climate to COVID and now the war in Ukraine. The goals were off track when we determined the decade for action in 2020. And so now what we're facing is, the struggle to get them back on track. And then perhaps in doing things differently, we can accelerate the scale and the urgency around some of the goals for people. It's a promise that the global community has made, and we can't drop the ball now. We have 8 years, so there are still possibilities of us making good on a number of the goals, but it will require a huge lift, and it will require one that is done with the multilateral system, but with international partnerships.
So what do you think that would look like when you do a lift like that and change course, do things differently to get things back on track? What does that look like?
Well, of recent, there have been a number of commitments to the climate agenda, for instance, the just transitions that we speak to on energy, that we speak to on food transformations of our systems, that we have another look at the global financial architecture so that the flows that we are seeing committed to are able to reach many countries at the same time. Now, this is compounded by what we have. The reality check is that we're still not vaccines with everyone. We still have to take a test. And so if you've got COVID, then you know that you can't move very much further. And that really does exacerbate many of the issues around the supply chains and economies getting back to build back better. So I would say that, for now, on the climate agenda, it's the best entry point that we have. We have a focus on a number of countries that have got to look at the emissions and reduce them to get to our 1.5-degree world, which is looking further and further out of reach. More importantly, on the adaptation, that's where we need to see flows coming in for many developing countries, which don't just address climate, but they address the issues of women. They will address the issues of jobs for young people. All of these will bring, for us, more stability in the world, more opportunity for growth and for inclusion.
Well, staying on the climate agenda, let's put that in the context of the current war in Ukraine, because that's really deepened the reliance on fossil fuels by the world's top emitters, and world temperatures are actually set to rise even further this year because of that. What do you think are some of the most immediate and important actions that can actually tangibly be taken by nations now to bring peace and stability while averting even further climate catastrophe because of what's going on in Ukraine?
Well, this is the latest crisis we have, the war in Ukraine, and the best solution to that is a pathway to peace now. And if we could stop the war today, that's what we should do. Even then, the damage that has been done on the millions of lives that have been affected in Ukraine, but the knock-on effect of what's happened in Ukraine around the world to over 1.8 billion people who are suffering from one of the three of we would say, the crises that is looming on the food systems, food security, a very big issue, the cost of living that has risen as a result. People are going hungry. The cost of fuel, energy crisis that we're looking at, and of course finance, because again here inflation is going up, interest rates are going up, the cost of debt servicing, and putting countries in a position of choiceless choices. Do the debt servicing or pay for social protection or health or education. So these are all issues that we're addressing now in trying to find a solution to, first of all, bringing down the cost of food and getting it to people. And this is through, again, working with Russia and with Ukraine to see that we get grains out of the ports in Ukraine, but also that we are lifting restrictions in Russia so that we can get food to people. That we are looking at the energy crisis. Again, as you rightly said, there is more now dependency on fossil fuel. And we're hoping that this will put speed to the transitions so that the fossil fuel dependency, because of the war, will give a trajectory of more investments in speeding up the green transition. That has its challenges, but on our way to COP27, we hope that we can address many of these as we look to renewables, as we look to see some of the other transition fuels that we will need to address for some regions.
Madam DSG, we're both from the global south, and as you look at the situation there in the context of all the challenges you rightly point out, many nations are still faced with the dichotomy of choosing between economic growth and development and responsible consumption and production. What is it that you think the United Nations can do to ensure that countries are able to grow in a manner that's sustainable, even with the context that we have going on today, and that innovation and developing industries can still be pursued? How do you see the UN's role in maintaining that balance or that choice?
Well, the UN in over 130 countries, our footprint there is to give the support and the policy advice and options to countries on many of the transitions that we speak about within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at the 17 goals, these are signposts to how we can make sure that our economies are more inclusive and they're delivering for young people and for women. That means increasing inclusive growth in our economies. It means looking at the green economy and the transitions on energy, on food systems that will benefit women and children. And I think here what you will see is that those policy options are what we're putting on the table, but we're also in the international community saying that the resources need to follow this as well. And we quite clearly see that resources are available. COP27, we had our investors commit to 130 trillion. Now we have to put in place a mechanism to say, well, how do we get those commitments into flows into these countries to help that happen? So our job is the convening of the partners, the convening of countries and stakeholders to see how we can continue to edge forward on some of the dire needs for investing in the SDGs.
United Nations Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, thank you so much. And thank you for spreading the hopeful message that I think we all need to hear right now. Thanks so much for the great work that you do always. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Zain.